All right. Welcome everyone to our Stories of Success webinar, a shift in perspective from staff well-being to workplace wellness. My name is Kathleen Lane, and I am the Executive Director of the EdCan Network. I'd like to begin by recognizing that we live and work on the traditional territories of the First Nations, the Métis, and the Inuit people. I am personally joining from the unceded territory of the Squamish Nation in Squamish, British Columbia. Today's webinar is part of a series of webinars highlighting how schools and school districts across Canada are supporting the well-being of their staff and students. It's just one of the many ways EdCan is working towards our goal of fostering healthier workplaces to improve outcomes for everyone in K-12 education. In addition to the Stories of Success webinars, we offer Well at Work advisor services, professional learning opportunities, a pan-Canadian community of practice, and a wide variety of free resources available through our websites, k12wellatwork.ca and edcan.ca. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's guests. Dr. Meg Miskolzie, Associate Superintendent of Student Services, and Mark Francis, Deputy Superintendent of Human Resources from Parkland School Division. Meg and Mark, can you share a little bit more about yourselves and your roles, and a bit about Parkland School Division to get us started?
First of all, before we even get started, this will be interesting to see who talks over who, Mark. But my name's Meg, and my portfolio within the division in Parkland is looking after all things student services, kindergarten to or early education through to grade 12, as well as wellness and community partnerships. Mark?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mark. I'm the Deputy Superintendent. One of my main portfolios is, of course, human resources, though I also branch out into communications, amongst other school operations, student discipline, things like that. Welcome, everyone. Maybe I'll just start by introducing a little bit beyond myself. I've been here in Parkland as Deputy Superintendent for 7 years. Prior to that, I was in Aspen View Public Schools, and I see some Aspen View people here today, where I was a longtime school administrator, division office superintendent, before coming here. So I've had the rural northern experience, and then, of course, in a little bit larger division now.
Wonderful.
Okay.
And can you just share with everybody who may not be aware of Parkland School Division, where are you located? How big is the division?
Absolutely. So Parkland School Division serves about 13,000 students. We have 22 schools that are west of Edmonton. So Spruce Grove, Stony Plain, and Parkland County, as far west as Entwistle. We also are currently the interim school authority for a school in Fort Chipewyan, which is a flying community in northern Alberta, which has been, is this year 3 now, Mark? Year 3, I believe, of being the interim school authority. So we have the pleasure of having that learning and opportunity as well.
We are a fairly large division. We are around the 8th largest in the province. We have about, in addition to the students, those 13,000 students, we are actually a very large employer. We're actually the largest employer west of Edmonton in the province of Alberta. We have about 1,300 people that are, on a full-time or near full-time basis. 650 plus teachers, almost 700 teachers, 600 EAs, support staff, another 100 facilities and maintenance and people like myself. And so all in, when we include our casual staff, we actually employ over 1,600 people.
Amazing.
So a very large employer, very large organization.
Amazing. And I understand that it was about 3 years ago, I might have my number wrong, that you included staff well-being as one of your school division strategic priorities. How did you first go about supporting this?
Yeah, so historically, Parkland has had support in place for what we would have called staff wellness at the time. And that was primarily part of the role of the Student Services Department, working with HR, who did, of course, our employee family benefit work. We had, for example, staff wellness representatives who met monthly. There was corporate sponsorships available for staff to access. And the division would do kind of that basic, which is still valuable. Everyone loves coffee and donuts, but we would do those occasional visits out to schools. But that was the basis of that work. It was important work, but it wasn't fully embedded into our system.
So one of the things that you know, the question around strategic priorities, how do you set a strategic priority? One of the things when I first came to Parkland a number of years ago, I did, and it's something I encourage people to do even at a school-based level, is you often say we have priorities, but you actually have to look deep in the organization. So one of the first tasks we did is we did a little bit of an organizational review, and what that would look like is if you state, you know, these 4 or 5 priorities, how is it actually appearing in your organization? So looking at things like board meeting agendas, professional development schedules, you know, meeting agendas, you know, lead team, which is our principals and directors when we meet, what is on those agendas? And so when you actually look at those items, the things that come up to those action items, such as professional development plans and so on, everyone has the stated goals of wellness. Everyone has the stated goals that appear on our websites and they sound nice. But when you actually do an organizational review, you have to ask yourself, is it actually being manifested in action that is being taken? Because that is in fact then what may indicate, is it a true priority? And I think in recognition, you know, Meg and I, and the other members of the executive team, we were saying the right things. We had web pages on, you know, we had stuff on staff wellness. I think we meant it. But I would say there was probably a lack of cohesion. You know, wellness in HR means number of absentee dates. What is your absenteeism? Wellness for a facilitator of wellness that is primarily look after student wellness might be, do staff have access to resources? It might mean to a principal, wellness is, are staff happy at work? And so one of the things is recognize that need for that divisional wellness focus. What we did is 4 of us, Meg, myself, our director of human resources, and a division principal of wellness and community partnerships. We went through and did the course, you know, diving into some of the CAS, the College of Alberta School Superintendent's resources, and exploring the Workplace Wellness Playbook and Implementation Guide. That's the CAS resource. And then, you know, did the course. Meg, what's the name of the course?
That was
Well at Work,
EdCan.
K-12 leadership course. Yes, very good. The Well at Work course. And the 4 of us committed to doing that over a period of time. And the main reason for that is we had to come to common language, because when I'm talking about wellness from an HR realm, it might be very different than a principal, or might be very different than student services. So we needed to come to kind of a common understanding.
One of the earliest shifts, something we determined when we were formulating that language, was trying to think about what do we mean when we talk about that term staff wellness or staff well-being. And as lovely as that sounds in concept, and what Mark said is right, we meant it when we said it. We recognize that as a school division and an employer, we can't be responsible for a staff's personal choices in their well-being. In you know, everyone wants a long walk on the beach, but I can't provide that. And so we really talked about, well, what are we trying to do? And that's when we shifted our language from staff well-being to workplace wellness. And so we really defined what is workplace wellness. And in using the work that we had done through EdCan's K-12 leadership series, as well as the CAS playbook, we looked at Canada's national standards for psychological health and safety in the workplace and the 13 workplace wellness factors, because those gave us really like a concrete area to be able to look at all 13 of those factors and give some weight and meat, and begin to do some data collection around what are we saying this is and what are those components, rather than it being a large kind of broad concept that we didn't have and we couldn't tie ourselves to. And so that's how we started that work.
Amazing. So getting the team to some common language, some common understanding, then you went to some data collection. Can you tell us more about the data collection process and how you use that to start developing strategies?
Yeah, so in our first year after we had met as a team, we came to that common language. We'd started to meet with our lead team and clarifying that shift in language. In the spring of 2023, we went and implemented the Guarding Minds at Work survey, which had been recommended through those series. And for any of you who aren't familiar, it's a free, and confidential tool that was really important to us, that we'd get the data, but we would respect the confidentiality from the staff. And what's nice about that tool is it's linked to the 13 workplace wellness factors. And so at first, after we had first run that, we had 58% engagement across our division. And we had, first of all, just done it at a division level. We didn't want our schools to see that we were placing direct pressure on them as leaders for comparative data or any of those pieces. We wanted to say, as a division, how are we doing? And so staff would select their group roles we identified. So for example, are you a teacher? Are you an educational assistant? Are you? So we could see the full divisional picture, but also see it by categories to look at discrepancies or areas we needed to work on. A big piece of that, though, was we wanted to make sure our unions were involved. So Mark, maybe do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Yeah, that's and obviously, we have 3 unions or associations that we work with in addition to the non-union group. So we really have kind of 4 distinct groups. And part of working with wellness, you have to get buy-in from people, that you're not just making a web page of resources. And part of that goes back to actually the importance of data and really being honest with data. When you do a Guarding Mind survey and ask people, do you feel that your leadership listens to you? Sometimes the results can challenge you, and data can be hard. And so, but that's part of the way to get your staff on side is recognize some of those terrible truths. So when staff report to us, through data about whether that being feeling safe at work, psychological safe at work, and when you have data that maybe our natural tendencies wanted to justify or explain, well, that's out of my control, I can't control that, and there's an element of truth of course to that, but it is actually being honest with what the data says to your union groups. And so we have been very honest in sharing that data with those groups. The other thing I would do is of course there's other data sets, and if you're not aware, in the province of Alberta, there's a lot of labor strife going on in particular in the education support staff area. And we have to listen to those voices. One of the things we know, we track data. This is a huge plug for knowing your numbers and tracking data. We track things such as behavior incidents in schools. One of the things, it's not easy to say, but we've had a 247% increase over the last 3 years, sorry, in physical aggression. Reported instances of physical aggression. Now, I'm not talking about punching teachers. I'm talking about grade 4 students that are unable to control and pushing and hitting. So 247%. And when you say, hey, look, we've got these numbers, we have this data, people are then saying, I'm feeling a little uncertain. When you have unions saying you have to come back and share that data, and then you have to do something with that. And so one of the things we did is, once we had those initial data sets and we started looking at, is going back to our lead team, which again is our principals and directors and supervisors. So it's both school and division level staff that meet. And we did have a retreat together. And really the whole retreat was based on staff wellness. Sorry, workplace wellness. Right? Yeah, see, shift in language. I'll talk about that a little bit later too. But is that workplace wellness and really getting real with what we need to do with that data, that crystal focus that you can't just do a survey and implement a new employee of the month and think that that's going to affect staff wellness in a substantial way. You actually have to start drilling down.
One of the pieces that we did as well is, and just, I know you were hoping Kathleen, we'd have some little tips and tricks, is we didn't wait to go to the unions after. Mark approached them in advance of running that survey to explain what it is, to make sure they were comfortable with what we would be asking, and to really explain that intent, right? So that, and I think that's why 58% for a division and staff of our size is a really great starting number. But we knew that if we didn't show some immediate actions and show some progress that was tangible, that percentage was going to decrease the next time we ran the survey. So we knew that we needed to blend some kind of short-term wins, low-hanging fruit, alongside some of those larger pieces, right? And so what we did, for example, was we contracted EdCan, and we had a Well at Work advisor who helped us also give an impartial evaluation of our data, because like Mark said, it's human nature to explain away some pieces. And so that was really helpful to kind of give us an unbiased look at our data, compare it to where maybe we held our biases. And as we, the four of us again at the table, and when I say that, Mark, myself, and the director and division principal, and eventually our executive team, when we looked at the data, we also drilled down to each individual question. And while schools were saying, well, how does this impact my staff and what should I do? As a senior leadership team, we were saying, what did our lead team tell us? Because that was one of the groups. What did our directors and administrators say? And what are we going to do to focus on ensuring that our leaders are well? Because they're helping support those projects in the school. And so we did a few quick wins. For example, recognition and reward was one of our lowers. That is tied to salary as well. But we said, well, what can we win in that area? And so we completely reworked our division newsletter to be focused specifically on staff wellness, naming staff, focusing on making sure. So when people started to see themselves named, guess what? People started opening the newsletter. That gets them access to some of those other resources maybe you wouldn't click on before. As well, we looked at what was some of the other things we did that were short-term, Mark? We went and we refined our staff wellness days, our staff appreciation days to the division. Yes, we had them, but with HR, they pulled every staff grouping to make sure, did every staff role in the division see themselves in one of those days? Were we perhaps getting flowers for every secretary on Secretary Day, but doing very little for this other staff grouping? And so we tried to, we have unified what that looks like across the division. And then last year in the spring, we administered our second survey. This time, thankfully, a 67% participation, so we know we're on the right track. And that data, when we received it this time, we did go out to schools. So we could see the division, we could see it by staff role and grouping, and schools could also see their school. And so in the spring last year, we sat down with the lead team, our principals and directors departments, and they looked through. So for example, our facilities department looked at their staff, right? As well as our school leaders looking at their staff, and they got to dig in. And sometimes, just like we had experienced in an executive team, that came as a bit of a shock, because what might show up is very different from your experience as a leader. And from what you might see. And so they had to go through that same process we did as a senior leadership team to kind of unbiased, step back, see how we can do those pieces. And so then our team at a division level provided them support in breaking that data down. And they set school-based and department level-based goals. This year, we've continued, we've ran sessions for our principals, for example, in different areas, balance, recognition, and reward. But also we have some really amazing leaders in our division who are doing work at their school or division level who have come forward. We ran a panel where four of our leaders got to share with their colleagues what they're doing with their data and how they've analyzed it. And then this spring, we're going to administer our third survey. And schools will be able to have that comparative data to see what's the impact of their actions and how do we move forward.
Amazing. One of the things that kind of really struck me, you talked about the shift from thinking about staff well-being or employee well-being and student well-being as a bit of more of an individual thing, to really thinking about it as the workplace. But the other thing that struck me that you haven't elaborated on a whole lot is this partnership between student services and human resources. And how did that come about, and how is that working to create a comprehensive view of well-being at Parkland?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, I'll jump in. So again, there is words matter, language matters. You know, the staff wellness, and you know, every jurisdiction I've been part of, every leadership team I've been part of has talked about staff wellness. And what that normally looks like is usually a teacher facilitator, someone that's got some knowledge. They in addition to student nutrition programs and finding resources, they also take an advisory role. And those people are super valuable, and many of us have those people in our divisions, and they do incredible work. But wellness is more than, you know, when we talk about workplace wellness, it's actually a shift in culture. It's not just you know, scavenger hunts. It's not just resources. It's not just someone coming out and doing some incredible work. And I don't mean to minimize that work by any means. But one of the things when I work with new leaders, I always talk about the importance of developing culture and having a crystal clear focus on developing culture, because culture develops whether we're intentional or not. So if you are not intentional about culture, you're 50-50. It might develop this way, it might develop that way. And so what we really needed our leaders to do, and ourselves to do, and a division to do, is get intentional about developing that culture about workplace wellness. We can't control, like Meg said, wellness at home. I can't control if someone has diabetes, but I can make the workplace better by making sure that staff member is close to the staff room. So if they need to go check blood sugar or get something, they can do that. The problem is it's easy to do physical. If I know someone has mobility, I can change where their classroom is. Of course, when we get into the levels of stress, you know, mental health, that's much harder, but it does take that cultural shift, is that we need to put wellness on the forefront of plans. You know, so we ask principals when they're planning their year around professional development, don't throw in wellness as that extra, oh yeah, I got to add wellness. I'm going to do a 5-minute at the beginning of my staff meeting, which then lends itself to the scavenger hunt, which is again good stuff, but it's not a 5-minute thing that I got to tack a wellness activity on the beginning of my staff meeting before I get to the important things, which are literacy, but before I get to the important things, which are the schedule for next year. You actually have to embed it culturally into that thing.
Mark, I think what I'll also add is, and I'll give a shout out to our superintendent as well and to our board, is that the wellness priority is something that was, when we said pick your priorities, and Mark talked earlier about how is that embedded. As soon as we have to be doing a board report to a board on workplace wellness and what those initiatives are, as soon as we have to actually show evidence of the work we are doing in a meaningful way, well, that truly shows the value in that work. It means that Mark and I would knock on each other's doors and say, how are we going to begin this work collaboratively together? And as much as I think divisions everywhere had the intention to do that work, when there's a written down accountability measure that can help drive that work that you establish as a team to ensure that you're going, that's what's going to drive you to, when there's a million other priorities, ensuring you come back to what the division has marked as important, right?
Amazing. So throughout, you know, this 20 minutes or so, you've talked about the importance of building trust and partnerships with the unions, of demonstrating progress, of having it embedded deeply in the culture, but as well as the structures of the organization and how you work together. I do want to allow a few moments for questions, but before we do that, are there any last things you'd like to share?
Yeah, just really quickly, because I would like to get some questions. There is some structural things you need to do. What is your OH&S committee doing? Is your OH&S committee just talking about working alone and tripping hazards, or is your OH&S in Alberta? Sorry, for those from I'm using Alberta language. We're mandated by law to have joint health and safety committees, which are employee groups that advise us on safety. And occupational health. But occupational health goes beyond tripping. What are you doing with those committees to look at, you know, we got into reports how, you know, people said to us, they didn't feel we were listening, you know, leadership was listening. So that committee bringing in the unions and creating a new way of reporting student incidents. So if there was a serious incident that maybe resulted in you being concerned about safety, a way that's being elevated, followed up on, and properly recorded. Data. But we hear from people that say, but I'm also being listened to, because I'm not in my classroom by myself feeling unsafe and I didn't know what to do, there's now follow-up, there's processes in place.
And
We have a
that
committee that's starting about for staff that are living with disabilities on how, these are an open that, I never knew I'm loud. But you know what? Use a microphone, because that person that has hearing aids, they actually can't hear me. I think I'm loud enough. So we have a committee advising us on that. I just really emphasize that you got to have structures, and you actually have to change some of your processes.
Awesome. And Meg, it sounded like you had a last thought there as well.
I'm going to say in the intentionality of who's sitting on those committees, right? So, for example, when Mark would traditionally be the person establishing that OH&S committee with some groups, he's like, but Meg, I'd like to have a member of your team from student services who knows a lot about those student incidents be part of that committee to help inform the direction. So again, trying to like take down those siloed walls and make sure that we do some cross collaboration with because we're both working towards the same intention, right?
Amazing. Thank you both. Lots of practical suggestions as well as insights into how you've navigated this change in thinking, this perspective around how do we truly embed well-being within our school division.